Why tell the story of a magazine that stopped publishing more than half a century ago? Especially one that some may think of as a middle American, middle of the road, middle-brow publication with photos that played number two to its better remembered arch rival Life. Because Look was one of the greatest mass circulation publications in U.S. history and had an extraordinary influence on mid 20th century America. It not only told powerful, thoughtful stories and printed outstanding photos, but also helped foster a national conversation for its 35 million readers around a common set of facts, ideas, and ideals. Look, which thrived during an era of other popular general interest magazines like Life, the Saturday Evening Post, and Collier's, was more iconoclastic and radical than its competitors. It did path-breaking reporting and published essays by major public figures from the late 1930s to the early 1970s. Yes, there were movie stars, photos of scantily clad models, and fluffy stories, but Look was a pioneer in covering and advocating for civil rights. It did some of the earliest and best stories about the threatening communist world, and it celebrated the cultural radicalism of the late 1960s. The story of Life has been told. Look's story has not. And Look actually outsold Life and every other magazine with original content from 1962 to 1969. As one of the magazine's ads cleverly gloated, Look is bigger than life. I recently published the first definitive book on the history and influence of Look. I spent several years poring over the roughly 900 issues published between 1937 and 1971, as well as a tiny fraction of the 5 million or so Look images held at the Library of Congress and elsewhere. I also interviewed some of Look's great writers, photographers, and editors. The more I dug, the more fascinating stories I uncovered. When Look exposed Emmett Till's murderers, when it sent a writer and photographer to follow every mile of the Iron Curtain, when it called for a black president and a woman president in 1970, when it nurtured Stanley Kubrick as a teenage staffer, when it cajoled Hitler's former photographer to turn over his images buried in the forests of Bavaria, when it lured Norman Rockwell to paint damning paintings of American racism, when it sympathetically told the story of a gay married couple in 1971, when one of its writers circled the Caribbean with Fidel Castro, when it introduced the idea of a generation gap, or when it published the first mass-market 3D images. There are so many great stories. Look is much more than a magazine that was once delivered to millions of doorsteps every other Tuesday, or a vehicle to meander down memory lane, a reminder of a different time in American life and a different type of journalism. Look not only offers a distinctive lens on an era that was the high water mark of American power and optimism, but it also helped Americans feel that we're all in this together, rather than see people with different ideas as enemies. 50 years after the magazine's audience peaked, President Obama spoke of the need for the kind of common conversation that Look facilitated and was so good at doing. So now you've gotten a taste of Look. This documentary will tell a lot of great stories about Look and the brilliant, often quirky journalists and photographers who worked for it. But it will also hit hot-button contemporary issues like race, the role of media, and the nature of politics and our economy. It will, of course, include many of Look's fabulous photos, as well as interviews with many of Look's surviving writers and photographers who are now in their 80s and 90s. I have some great filmmakers, but it costs money to film all over the country, digitize and get rights to photos, do post-production, get into festivals, and market the film. I hope you'll support me and my team in capturing this amazing, never-before-told chapter of American history. Thank you.